Captain Jack Miller stood at the viewport of the transport ship, his eyes fixed on the dusty orange planet growing larger as they approached. Terminus, they called it. End of the line. The name was fitting in more ways than one. "How long till landing?" he asked, not turning away from the view. 2 hours, Captain," answered Tom Davis from his station at the communications panel. The young tech specialist's fingers moved quickly over the controls, but his usual enthusiasm was missing. Jack nodded silently. 2 hours until they reached the surface. 2 hours until this 500 soldiers, his responsibility, his family, would begin a mission that wasn't meant to succeed. The orders had come directly from High Command. Secure a landing zone on Terminus, gather intelligence on the alien Vex forces, and prepare for the main invasion fleet. Simple, straightforward, except for all the things that didn't add up. Their equipment was outdated, with rifles that jammed in dusty conditions, the exact environment they were heading into. Their transport ships were old models with failing life support systems. They had been given minimal medical supplies, barely enough food for 2 weeks, and strangely, a complete radio silence order after landing. High Command wanted Terminus. The planet was rich with rare minerals needed for faster-than-light engines, but the Vex who controlled it were known fighters, brutal and efficient. So Command had made a calculation. Why risk valuable troops and equipment when you could send in a sacrificial force first? Jack moved away from the viewport and walked through the main hold where his soldiers prepared for landing. He saw the truth in their eyes. They knew what this was. Not a mission, a suicide run. Sergeant Anna Reed looked up from checking her rifle as Jack approached. Her face was hard, but her eyes showed understanding. "Everyone knows, don't they?" Jack asked quietly. "Yes, sir. Hard to miss when they give us broken equipment and 2 weeks of rations for a 3-month mission." Anna had never been one to sugarcoat things. It's why Jack had made her his second in command. Gather the officers in the planning room. 10 minutes. As Jack walked away, he felt the weight of command heavier than ever before. High Command had betrayed them, but he wouldn't betray his people. He had spent the 3-week journey to Terminus forming a different kind of plan. In the small planning room, Jack faced his 4 top officers. Sergeant Anna Reeves stood with arms crossed, her battle-scarred face serious as always. Tom Davis, barely 25 but the best tech specialist in the division, nervously tapped his fingers on the table. Lisa Jones, their chief medic, sat quietly, her medical bag, too empty of supplies, at her feet, and Mark Wilson, tactical officer with 15 years of experience, studied the planet maps with a frown. "I'll get straight to the point," Jack began. "This mission is designed to fail. We're being sent in blind, under-equipped, and without proper support. Command wants information on Vex defenses, and they're using us to get it." Nobody looked surprised. They had all figured it out already. Standard procedure would be to follow orders and die trying. Jack continued. "I'm proposing something different." He touched a control, and a holographic map of their landing zone appeared. "Our official orders are to establish a forward base here and begin reconnaissance missions. If we do that, the Vex will wipe us out within days. Command knows this. They're expecting it. They'll collect data on Vex weapon capabilities from our defeat and send the main force in better prepared." Mark Wilson nodded grimly. "Classic sacrificial play. I've seen it before, just never from our own side." "So what are we doing instead, Captain?" Lisa asked, her medical training making her value life above all else. Jack smiled for the first time in weeks. "We're going to disappear." Over the next hour, he outlined his plan. They would make their initial landing as ordered, but instead of establishing the designated base, they would split into small, mobile units. They would abandon their trackers, effectively vanishing from Command's monitoring systems. "Won't that be seen as desertion?" Tom asked, worried. "Technically, yes," Jack admitted. "But we're already written off as dead. We're going to use that to our advantage." The plan was risky, but it played to human strengths. adaptability, creativity, and the will to survive against all odds. Each squad would have specific objectives: securing better weapons, finding sustainable food and water sources, learning Vex patrol patterns, and most importantly, gathering actual intelligence rather than just serving as target practice. "One more thing," Jack said as they finished. "I need to be clear. I'm not ordering any of you to do this. This goes against direct commands. Anyone who wants to follow the original orders can do so without judgment." Anna snorted. "With all due respect, sir, Command didn't give us much choice. They sent us to die. I'd rather live to spite them." The others nodded in agreement. "Then it's settled," Jack said. "Operation Cockroach begins after landing." "Cockroach, sir?" Tom asked, raising an eyebrow. Jack smiled grimly. "Because we're going to survive when everything says we shouldn't." As the meeting ended, Mark stayed behind. "The troops will follow you, Jack. But what's the end game here? Even if we survive longer than expected, we're still stranded on a hostile planet." Jack nodded. It was the question he'd been asking himself since discovering the truth about their mission. First, we survive. Then we learn about the enemy. And then, he paused, the full weight of what he was planning settling on him. Then we find a way to win on our terms, not commands. 2 hours later, they entered Terminus's atmosphere. The descent was rough, the old transport ships shaking violently as they pushed through thick dust clouds. Warning lights flashed across control panels. Over the comms, Jack could hear the other transports reporting system failures. This was it, the start of their suicide mission. The first shots came as they broke through the cloud cover. Bright energy beams from hidden Vex defense posts struck 3 of their 7 transports immediately. Jack watched through the viewport as the ships carrying nearly 200 of his people erupted into flames and plummeted to the surface. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered, but their pilot was already pulling the ship into a steep dive, trying to avoid the Vex targeting systems. 2 more ships hit. Tom called out from communications, "They're going down, but report survivors." Their own ship rocked as a glancing blow struck one engine. Alarms wailed as the transport began losing altitude too quickly. "Brace for impact," Jack shouted, grabbing onto a support beam. The crash was violent. Jack was thrown against the ceiling, then slammed back to the floor as the ship flipped and skidded across the rocky terrain. Metal tore and sparked around them. Someone was screaming. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the interior in a dull red glow. When the ship finally stopped moving, Jack pushed himself up, ignoring the pain shooting through his shoulder. "Sound off. Who's alive?" Groans and calls came from around the hold. Anna was already on her feet, blood streaming from a cut on her forehead, but otherwise looking functional. Lysa was moving between injured soldiers, her limited medical supplies already being put to use. "Communications are down," Tom reported, coughing through the smoke. "Life support failing. We need to evacuate." Jack nodded. "Get everyone who can move ready to go. Priority on weapons, medical supplies, and water." "Vex patrols will be here soon," Mark warned, checking his rifle. "Their defensive positions are more advanced than our intel suggested." Jack looked around at his surviving crew. They had been sent here to die, used as nothing more than expendable tools by their own leaders. But as he watched them quickly organizing, helping the wounded, preparing to face whatever waited outside, he saw something Command had overlooked. Humans didn't accept death easily, especially when it came as a betrayal. "Remember the plan," Jack said as they prepared to open the damaged hatch. "We're not here to win their war. We're here to survive their betrayal." The hatch creaked open, revealing the harsh landscape of Terminus. The air was breathable but filled with dust that immediately coated their skin and equipment. In the distance, 2 more of their transport ships burned, sending black smoke into the orange sky. Jack took the first step onto the planet's surface. The ground was hard, covered with reddish rocks and sparse, thorny vegetation. The horizon stretched out in jagged hills and deep valleys. Good terrain for hiding, for surviving. 5 minutes until we split into assigned squads. He reminded everyone. Remove your trackers. As far as command is concerned, we died in the landing. As the surviving members of the 87th Battalion gathered around him, Jack felt a fierce determination replace his earlier anger. High Command had sent them here as sacrifices, expecting reports of their deaths to filter back as valuable tactical data. Instead, they were about to vanish, and in that disappearance would be the first step toward an unlikely victory that no one, not Command, not the Vex, could possibly foresee. They had been sent to die. But Jack Miller and the 87th Battalion had other plans. 2 weeks after the crash landing, Sergeant Anna Reed crawled on her belly to the top of a rocky ridge. The orange dust of Terminus had turned her once blue uniform into a rust-colored camouflage. She raised her binoculars and scanned the valley below. A Vex patrol moved along the dried riverbed. 6 soldiers in their strange armor that looked like a mix of insect shells and metal plates. They carried energy weapons that could cut a human in half with one shot. Anna counted silently. This was the 3rd patrol to use this route in 2 days. The Vex were creatures of habit, a weakness her team had quickly learned to exploit. She slid back down the ridge to where her squad waited. 5 soldiers who looked as dusty and tired as she did, but their eyes were alert. They had survived when Command expected them all to be dead by now. Same route, same timing, she told them. They'll pass the narrow section in 15 minutes. We'll take them there. Nobody questioned her plan. In the 2 weeks since Captain Miller had split the surviving members of the 87th into small squads, they had learned to work with brutal efficiency. Anna's group specialized in one thing: acquiring better weapons. They moved quickly through the rocky terrain, using the paths they had carefully mapped to avoid Vex detection devices. At the ambush point, a narrow section where the patrol would be forced to walk in single file, they set up the trap. It wasn't fancy. They didn't have fancy. What they had were modified grenades using explosive compounds they discovered in the soil of Terminus. Tom Davis from Tech Squad had figured that out on day 3. The information had spread through the scattered human forces via their brief, coded radio contacts each night. Remember, Anna said as they took positions, we need their weapons intact. The trap worked perfectly. The first explosion made the Vex patrol stop in confusion. The second drove them into cover exactly where Anna wanted them. Her squad attacked from 3 sides, using the few working human rifles they had, aiming carefully for the weak spots in Vex armor they had identified through previous encounters. In less than 2 minutes, all 6 Vex were down. Anna's squad had suffered no casualties. Strip them of everything useful, she ordered. We've got 10 minutes before their missed check-in brings reinforcements. The squad moved with practiced speed, taking weapons, communication devices, and the strange power cells the Vex used. These would be delivered to Captain Miller's central camp hidden deep in a cave system 5 miles away. As they finished, Anna's radio crackled with a coded message. Base to Hunt lead. Tech needs intact comm unit. Priority. Anna tapped her response. Hunt lead to base. Coming with gifts. ETA 2 hours. She looked at her squad, feeling a surge of pride. 2 weeks ago, they had been sacrificial lambs. Now they were hunters. Let's move out. We've got a delivery to make. The hidden base camp had started as a small cave. Now it extended deep into the mountain, with tunnels dug by hand and with repurposed Vex mining tools. Captain Miller had chosen the location carefully, a natural formation of rocks that blocked scanning technology near an underground water source with multiple escape routes. When Anna's squad arrived, Lisa Jones met them at the entrance. The medic looked tired but much more confident than she had on the ship. How's Green? Anna asked, referring to one of her soldiers who had been injured 3 days earlier. Walking again, Lisa said with a small smile. That Vex medical gel works wonders once you figure out how to use it. She pointed to the communication devices they'd brought. Tom's been waiting for those. He's in the tech cave. Anna nodded and handed the devices to one of her squad members to deliver. Where's the captain? Strategy room. He'll want your report. The strategy room was just a wider section of cave with a table made from salvaged ship parts. Jack Miller stood over it, studying a map they had created of the surrounding 50 miles. Mark Wilson stood beside him, pointing to various markers they had placed. Jack looked up as Anna entered. His face was thinner than 2 weeks ago, with new lines around his eyes, but he stood straighter. Successful hunt? He asked. 6 Vex down, 6 new weapons, plus comm units for Tom, Anna reported. Their patrols are becoming predictable. They're not adapting to our ambushes. Jack nodded. That matches what we're seeing everywhere. They follow preset patterns and don't change unless ordered by higher command. Good news for us, Mark added. Bad tactical doctrine on their part. There's something else, Anna said, placing a small device on the table. It looked like a data storage unit with Vex symbols etched into its surface. Found this on their leader. Tom might be able to get something from it. Jack picked up the device, turning it over in his hands. Good work. We're starting to piece together their command structure. It's not what command told us at all. How so? Anna asked. Jack gestured to the map. The Vex aren't a unified force. We've identified at least 3 different armor styles, communication frequencies, and patrol areas. They're not working together. If anything, they seem to be watching each other as much as looking for us. This was new information. Anna leaned over the map, seeing the different markers Jack had placed. 3 separate forces. Why would command miss that? Because they didn't care, Mark said flatly. We weren't sent to gather real intelligence. We were sent to die and reveal Vex weapon capabilities through our deaths. Jack raised a hand to stop Mark's bitter words. What matters is what we do with this information now. Tom has been intercepting their communications. He can't translate everything yet, but he's certain these are 3 distinct factions. So we're not fighting an alien empire, Anna said slowly, understanding the implications. We're walking into a civil war. Exactly. Jack's eyes lit up with the same determination she had seen in the planning room of their ship. And that changes everything. Their conversation was interrupted as Tom Davis rushed into the room, excitement clear on his face despite his exhaustion. Captain, you need to see this, he said, holding up a tablet showing strange symbols that kept changing. I got into their communication network. These aren't just separate factions. They're actively working against each other. And the smallest group, the ones with the blue markings on their armor, they're losing. Jack looked at the information, then back at the map. How confident are you in the translation? Confident enough, Tom said. They use mathematical sequences as the basis of their language. Once I figured that out, the rest started to make sense. Jack was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. I think it's time for Phase 2, he finally said. Anna raised an eyebrow. We have a Phase 2. I thought the plan was just to survive as long as possible. The plan, Jack said, a slow smile forming, is to turn their expectation of our death into our greatest weapon. He moved several markers on the map, creating a new pattern. The weakest Vex faction is the one most likely to consider working with us. Common enemies make for strange allies. Anna stared at him. You want to make a deal with the Vex, the aliens we've been killing. I want to contact one faction, yes. The technical specialists with blue markings. Tom says they're losing the Civil War, and they seem less aggressive toward us already. They've never initiated attacks on our squads. The room fell silent as they considered this radical idea. Working with any Vex seemed impossible just 2 weeks ago. But they had learned more about their enemy in 14 days of guerrilla warfare than Command had discovered in years of distant observation. It's risky, Mark finally said, but no riskier than what we're already doing. Anna looked at the map, then at Jack. So instead of just surviving, we're changing the game completely. Jack nodded. Command sent us here to die for their war. I say we live and create our own peace. As his words settled over them, Anna felt something she hadn't expected to find on this mission. Hope. Not just for survival, but for something that might actually matter. They had been sent as sacrifices, but on this dusty orange planet, they were becoming something else entirely. The architects of their own destiny. Captain Jack Miller stood at the edge of the meeting place, a flat expanse of rock surrounded by tall stone formations that blocked most scanning technology. The wind blew dust across his boots as he waited, his hand never far from his weapon, a Vex energy rifle taken from one of their first successful ambushes. "This is crazy," Mark whispered beside him. "We should have more backup." "More humans would make them nervous," Jack replied. "This needs to be small, personal." They had spent 3 days setting up this meeting with the blue-marked Vex faction that Tom now called the Modernists. 3 days of careful signals, encoded messages sent through captured communication devices, and nerve-wracking uncertainty. "They're coming," Anna said from her position on a higher rock. She had insisted on being part of this meeting, though she remained hidden with a clear shot at the approaching Vex if things went wrong. Jack straightened as 3 figures appeared from behind the rocks on the far side of the clearing. They moved with the strange, fluid grace all Vex possessed. 2 carried weapons, standard for their kind. The one in the middle was different. Smaller, with more intricate blue patterns on its armor, and what looked like tools rather than weapons attached to its belt. "That's their leader," Tom said quietly. He stood slightly behind Jack, a translator device of his own making clutched tightly in his hands. The markings indicate a technical or scientific rank. The 3 Vex stopped 20 paces away. The one in the middle stepped forward, its head tilting in what Jack had learned was a gesture of assessment. "Remember," Tom whispered, "they communicate partly through color shifts in those faceplates. Try to watch for blue. It indicates openness. Red is aggression." Jack nodded and took a deliberate step forward. He placed his weapon slowly on the ground, a gesture they had indicated would begin the meeting. The lead Vex's faceplate shifted from yellow to a pale blue. "A good sign. We are ready to talk," Jack said clearly. Tom activated his translator, and a series of clicks and humming tones emerged. They had tested it extensively on recordings, but this was its first real use. The Vex leader responded with similar sounds, which Tom's device converted to rough human speech. "Why humans seek modernist faction? Others would kill you immediately." Jack had prepared for this question. "We recognize different factions among your people. Your group has not attacked us first. The others have." After Tom translated, the Vex's faceplate rippled with bands of blue and green. Its companions remained yellow, alert but not hostile. "Humans were sent as scouts for invasion," the Vex stated. Not a question, but an assumption. Jack took a calculated risk. "We were sent to die. Our own military sacrificed us to test your defenses. They do not know we still live." Tom hesitated before translating this admission, giving Jack a concerned look. Revealing this weakness was dangerous, but Jack believed it was their best chance at connection. When the Vex heard the translation, all 3 of their faceplates flickered rapidly through patterns of blue and white. They made sounds that the translator couldn't process. "I think that's surprise," Tom whispered. "Maybe disbelief." The lead Vex stepped closer, its movements more fluid now. "Your own kind sent you as waste material. To die." "Yes," Jack said simply. "We were considered expendable." The Vex leader made a gesture to its companions, who lowered their weapons slightly. Then it addressed Jack directly, its faceplate now solid blue. "We also are expendable to dominant faction. They wish technology only for war. We wish technology for growth." For several seconds, nobody spoke. The wind whistled between the rocks, blowing more orange dust across the meeting ground. Jack felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition of shared experience that transcended their different worlds. Your people betrayed you, the Vex continued. Our people wish to destroy us for believing war is inefficient. Perhaps we have common purpose. Jack glanced at Mark, who gave a slight nod. This was going better than they had dared hope. What is your name? Jack asked. I am Captain Jack Miller. The translator struggled with the Vex's response, finally producing. Concept does not translate fully. Closest meaning. One who builds new paths. You may call me Krav. Krav, Jack repeated, feeling the strangeness of the word. We propose an alliance. Against both our enemies. Bold proposal, Krav responded, its faceplate rippling with blue and purple. Why should modernists trust humans? Jack had anticipated this question too. Because we both need to survive, and neither of us can do it alone. You are losing your civil war. We are stranded on your planet. Together, we might both live. Krav was silent for a long moment, its faceplate shifting through patterns too complex for Jack to interpret. Finally, it spoke again. Terms of alliance. We share intelligence. We coordinate our actions against common enemies. We do not attack each other's people. We find a way to communicate with my world that bypasses our corrupt leadership. Tom struggled to translate all this, but Krav seemed to understand the essence. It made a gesture that looked almost human, a tilting of its head and a spreading of its three-fingered hands. Acceptable beginning, it said. But problem approaches. Your leaders send new ships. Many. To find why you do not report deaths as expected. Jack felt his heart rate increase. How do you know this? We monitor all orbital signals. Fleet approaches. 7 cycles until arrival. Tom looked at Jack with wide eyes. 7 cycles is about 2 weeks in our time. Mark cursed under his breath. Command is sending a cleanup crew. They noticed we're still alive. Jack's mind raced through possibilities. A human fleet arriving would complicate everything. They would expect to find the 87th Battalion either dead or following original orders. Instead, they would find survivors working with one Vex faction against others. It would look like treason. But it also created an opportunity. Krav, Jack said carefully. The fleet coming is not our ally. They expect us dead. They will attack us as well as you if they discover the truth. Krav's faceplate flashed with rapid patterns. Then we share enemies in space and on ground. Dominant Vex faction prepares large attack on our main facility in 6 cycles. We're caught between 2 forces that want us dead, Mark muttered. But Jack was already seeing a different picture. He looked at Krav with new intensity. Or we have 2 enemies who don't know about each other. 2 forces that we can prepare for because we know they're coming. Krav's faceplate settled into a steady blue glow. You suggest strategy of misdirection. Make enemies face each other instead of us. Jack nodded slowly. Exactly. We feed your dominant faction information about the human fleet. We send misinformation to our command about Vex positions. Set a trap. Anna called down from her hidden position, unable to contain herself any longer. Krav looked up at her voice but did not seem alarmed by the discovery of another human. Its faceplate shifted to a pattern of blue and green that Tom's notes identified as indicating interest or approval. Dangerous strategy, Krav said. Complex timing. Many variables. But if it works, Jack replied, both our peoples get a chance at something neither of our leaders wanted to give us. Survival, Krav said. Jack smiled slightly. More than survival. Victory. On our own terms. The wind picked up around them, swirling dust into small tornadoes that danced across the meeting ground. Human and Vex stood facing each other, 2 supposed enemies finding unexpected common ground on a planet meant to be their grave. We will need detailed plans, Krav finally said. My technical team must meet with yours. Much work in little time. Jack nodded and picked up his weapon slowly, holstering it rather than holding it ready, a gesture of trust. Tom will coordinate with your team. We start immediately. As they prepared to return to their respective bases, Krav made one final statement. "Your leaders were wrong to consider you waste material, Captain Jack Miller. Perhaps mine were too." Jack watched the three Vex depart, feeling the weight of what they had just started. They had been sent to die in a war. Instead, they might have just taken the first steps toward peace. Either way, nothing would be the same again. The human fleet appeared in the Terminus system exactly when Krav had predicted. 7 massive warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel, their weapons systems powering up immediately. From the hidden observation post in Terminus's largest moon, Jack watched through the enhanced telescope they had built using combined human and Vex technology. "Flagship identified," Tom said beside him, his eyes fixed on the scanner. "The determined. Admiral Robert Green commanding." Jack nodded grimly. Green is known for following orders to the letter. He won't question command's intentions. They had prepared for this moment over the past 2 weeks. Working day and night alongside Krav and the modernist Vex, they had created an elaborate web of misinformation, false signals, and carefully placed evidence. Like a complex game of chess, they had positioned all the pieces. Now it was time to see if their gamble would work. "Transmission ready?" Jack asked. Tom nodded, holding up the communication device they had modified. "Ready to broadcast on official military channels. They'll think it's coming from scattered survivors of the 87th following original orders." The message they would send was carefully crafted. Reports of massive Vex forces gathered in the asteroid belt surrounding Terminus, damaged but still functioning emergency beacons, and coordinates that would lead Admiral Green's fleet directly into the path of the dominant Vex faction's main armada. "Send it," Jack ordered. Tom activated the device. A series of coded military signals streamed toward the human fleet. They watched the ships in silence, waiting for a response. "Multiple course changes detected," Anna reported from her station at the scanner. "They're taking the bait, moving toward the asteroid belt." Jack allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 complete. Now for the more dangerous part. "Signal Krav," he said to Mark. "Tell them to activate the dominant faction lures." While Tom's team had been handling the human fleet deception, Krav's technical specialists had created something equally impressive. A series of disguised transmitters planted throughout the asteroid belt that mimicked human military scanning signals. To the dominant Vex faction, currently gathering for their planned attack on the modernists, it would appear that human forces were attempting a sneak assault. "Confirmed," Mark said after a moment. "Modernists report all lures active. Dominant faction ships are already responding." Jack watched through the telescope as tiny points of light began moving from the far side of Terminus, the dominant Vex fleet changing course, heading toward what they believed was a human sneak attack. In reality, they were moving directly toward Admiral Green's forces. "Now we wait," Jack said quietly. The wait wasn't long. Just 20 minutes later, the first flashes of weapons fire appeared in the asteroid belt. The Battle of Twin Betrayals, as they would later call it, had begun. Through their observation equipment, they watched as chaos unfolded. Human ships fired on Vex vessels that suddenly appeared before them. Vex forces responded with their more advanced weapons, causing serious damage to 2 human ships immediately. Neither side understood they had been lured into an encounter, each believing they were responding to the other's aggression. "This is where it gets complicated," Jack told his team. "Prepare the shuttle. We need to be ready to launch the moment there's an opening." The shuttle was their most ambitious creation, a hybrid vessel built from parts of their crashed transport ships and modernist Vex technology. It looked strange, a patchwork of human angular design and flowing Vex architecture. But it was fast and had one critical feature, a communication system powerful enough to reach both fleets simultaneously. They watched for another hour as the battle intensified. The human fleet had regrouped after the initial surprise and formed a defensive pattern. The dominant Vex forces had surrounded them, but were taking significant losses from the humans' unexpected firepower. "There," Anna said suddenly, pointing to a gap in the fighting. Path to the human flagship is clear for about 5 minutes if we go now. Launch, Jack ordered. The hybrid shuttle shot away from the moon base, accelerating faster than any human craft could manage. Tom worked the navigation controls while Mark handled weapons. Anna stood beside Jack, both of them watching the battle grow larger in their view screen. Remember, Jack told them all, we only get one chance at this. If Green doesn't listen, or if either side decides to shoot first and ask questions later, we're finished. No one responded. They all knew the stakes. They reached the edge of the battle zone in just under 4 minutes. Explosions lit up space around them as human and Vex ships exchanged fire. Through gaps in the fighting, Jack could see the determined Admiral Green's flagship directing the human defense. Open a channel, Jack ordered. Broadcast on all frequencies, human and Vex. Tom activated their communication system. Ready, Captain. Jack took a deep breath. This is Captain Jack Miller of the 87th Battalion. To Admiral Green and all human forces, hold your fire. You have been manipulated into this conflict. To the dominant Vex forces, we have information critical to your survival. Both sides must cease fire and listen. For several long seconds, there was no response. The battle continued around them, energy weapons and missiles flying between the opposing fleets. Then, unexpectedly, a voice came through their comm system. This is Admiral Robert Green. Captain Miller was reported killed in action. Identify yourself properly or be treated as an enemy combatant. Jack had prepared for this. Authorization code Miller 774 Gamma Echo. Check your records, Admiral. The 87th wasn't wiped out. We were sent here to die as a measuring stick for Vex capabilities. But we survived, and we've discovered something more important than this battle. There was a long pause. Jack could imagine the Admiral checking the authorization code, conferring with his officers, trying to understand this unexpected development. Finally, Green's voice returned. Your code checks out, Miller, but that doesn't explain your current actions or why I shouldn't have you arrested for interfering in a military operation. Because there's a third player in this system, Jack replied. A faction manipulating both humans and Vex against each other. We have proof transmitted to your science officer's station now. Tom sent the data package they had prepared, combined intelligence from their observations and Krav's research, evidence of the secretive Vex ascendancy faction that had been working behind the scenes, encouraging conflict between humans and the other Vex factions. The ascendancy wants us to destroy each other, Jack continued. They've been feeding false intelligence to both sides for years. This battle is exactly what they wanted. As if to punctuate his words, a new set of ships appeared at the edge of the system, sleeker and more advanced than the dominant Vex vessels. The true enemy revealing itself. Admiral, Jack said urgently, those ships belong to the faction we've identified as the Ascendancy. They're here to clean up whatever's left after we've weakened each other. We need to stop fighting each other right now. There was no immediate response from Green, but Jack could see changes in the human fleet's formation. They were shifting to face the new threat. Similarly, the dominant Vex forces had begun to regroup. Then a new voice joined the channel, the distinctive tones of Krav, translated through their system. Dominant Command, this is Technical Chief Krav of the Modernist faction. The human captain speaks truth. Ascendancy has deceived all. Evidence transmitted to your systems now. They are the true enemy of all Vex kinds. For several tense minutes, nothing seemed to change. The human and dominant Vex fleets maintained their positions, still partially engaged with each other, while watching the approaching Ascendancy ships. Then Admiral Green's voice returned. Captain Miller, I don't know how you've survived, or what you've been doing on that planet, but your evidence is compelling. I'm ordering a temporary ceasefire with dominant Vex forces. Get to my ship. We need to talk. Quickly. Jack looked at his team, seeing hope and disbelief mingled on their faces. They had done the impossible, stopped a battle between sworn enemies and revealed the true threat. "We're on our way, Admiral," Jack replied. "And I'm bringing someone you should meet." As their shuttle changed course toward the Determined, Crab's vessel emerged from hiding to join them. Together, Human and Vex, they approached the flagship of the human fleet. The battle of twin betrayals hadn't ended in mutual destruction as planned by the Ascendancy. Instead, it had created the first true alliance between species who had been manipulated into hating each other. The real fight was just beginning, but for the first time, they would face it together. The combined fleet of human and Vex ships approached Terminus with weapons ready. From the bridge of the Determined, Jack watched the dusty orange planet grow larger on the view screen. It looked different from this perspective, less like a prison, and more like a battlefield waiting to happen. "Strange days," Admiral Green said, standing beside him. The Admiral was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. "A week ago, I was ordered to finish what we thought was a failed mission. Now I'm working with aliens we've been fighting for years." Jack nodded. "The Ascendancy has been playing us against each other for a long time. They wanted us to weaken each other while they prepared their real invasion." On the other side of the bridge stood Krav and two other modernist Vex. Their presence on a human warship would have been unthinkable before. Now they were valued allies. Even more surprising was the dominant Vex commander, General Tark, who had reluctantly joined their alliance after seeing the evidence of Ascendancy manipulation. "Scans show heavy Ascendancy activity around their main fortress," Tom reported from his station. After proving his technical skills, he had been given temporary access to the flagship's systems. "They're bringing in reinforcements through some kind of portal technology." Admiral Green frowned. "They know we're coming." "Of course they know," Krav said through its translator. "They have observed us making peace. This disrupts their long plan. They will fight very hard now." The plan they had developed was dangerous but necessary. While the combined fleet engaged the Ascendancy ships in orbit, ground forces would attack the fortress itself. Jack and the surviving members of the 87th Battalion would lead the assault alongside modernist and dominant Vex forces. Their goal: reach the central command chamber where the Ascendancy controlled its operations. "Time to go," Jack said, looking at Anna, Mark, and the other soldiers of the 87th who had joined them on the flagship. "Our transport leaves in 10 minutes. As they walked to the shuttle bay, Anna fell in step beside him. "We started with 500 soldiers. We're down to 172. Not great odds for saving the galaxy." Jack smiled slightly. "Better odds than we had when we crashed on that planet expecting to die." The descent to Terminus was smoother this time, with proper ships and no one shooting at them. As they approached the landing zone, Jack could see the space battle beginning above them. Flashes of light as human and Vex ships engaged the Ascendancy fleet. They landed 3 miles from the Ascendancy fortress, a massive structure built into a mountain that hadn't appeared on any of their previous scans. The combined ground force of humans and Vex moved out immediately, using the rocky terrain for cover. "Just like old times," Mark said as they took positions behind a ridge. "Except this time, we have proper backup." Jack looked at the mixed force behind them. Humans in their battle armored alongside blue-marked modernist Vex, and the larger, more heavily armed dominant Vex warriors. An impossible alliance forged through desperation and a common enemy. "First wave, move up," Jack ordered through the comm system. The attack had to be perfectly coordinated. Any hesitation would give the Ascendancy time to bring more forces through their portals. The battle began with an explosion as modernist Vex technology disabled the fortress's outer defenses. Human and Vex forces surged forward together, covering each other as they advanced toward the massive structure. The Ascendancy defenders responded immediately. They looked like Vex but moved differently, faster, more fluid, almost as if they were partly made of energy rather than solid matter. Their weapons fired beams that could cut through even dominant Vex armor. "Push forward," Jack shouted as he saw the attack wavering. "We can't give them time to regroup." Lisa Jones, who had set up a field medical station behind the front line, was already treating wounded from both species. The sight of a human medic helping injured Vex soldiers would have been unimaginable weeks ago. The battle intensified as they reached the fortress walls. The Ascendancy defenders fought with desperate intensity, but the combined human Vex force pressed forward. Step by bloody step, they advanced into the structure. "Jack," Tom's voice came through the comm. "I'm picking up massive energy readings from the central chamber. They're powering something up. We need to move faster." "Anna, take your team left," Jack ordered. "Mark, right. I'll go center with Crab's forces. We meet at the central chamber." They split up, fighting through the fortress's winding corridors. The interior was unlike anything Jack had seen before, walls that seemed to shift and change, technology that looked more grown than built. It was alien even to the Vex allies fighting alongside them. Jack's team encountered heavy resistance as they neared the central chamber. The Ascendancy defenders were making a last stand. "We're pinned down," Anna reported over the comm. "Can't reach the chamber from this side." "Same here," Mark added. "Too much firepower." Jack looked at Krav, who was using a modernist scanning device. "Any other way in?" Krav studied the readings. "Small maintenance passage, too narrow for my kind. Human might fit." Jack checked the scanner. The passage was tight but possible. "I'll go. Cover me." Before anyone could argue, Jack slipped into the narrow tunnel. It was barely wide enough for his shoulders, forcing him to crawl through darkness toward a faint light ahead. He could hear the battle raging behind him, growing more distant as he moved deeper into the fortress. The passage ended at a small vent overlooking the central chamber. What Jack saw through it made his blood run cold. The chamber was enormous, filled with technology beyond his understanding. At its center stood a glowing column of energy that pulsed with a sickly light. Around it, dozens of containment units held what looked like suspended bodies, some human, some Vex, some of species Jack had never seen before. 3 Ascendancy leaders stood at control panels, their forms shifting between solid and energy as they worked. They were preparing something. The energy column was growing brighter, the pulse faster. Jack forced the vent open and dropped into the chamber. The Ascendancy leaders turned toward him, their faces, if they could be called faces, showing no surprise. "Human," one said in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You are too late. The assimilation has begun." Jack raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the leader gestured. Invisible force lifted Jack off his feet and pulled him toward the center of the room. "Your mind will join our collection," the leader continued, "as will those of all who resist. We do not destroy. We absorb. We improve." As Jack struggled against the force holding him, he understood the true horror of the Ascendancy. They weren't just conquerors. They were collectors, harvesting the consciousness of other species to add to their composite intelligence. "Why?" Jack managed to ask as he was pulled closer to the energy column. "Evolution requires the best of all," the leader replied. "Your species has adaptability. Vex have technical knowledge. Others have different qualities. Together in our collective, perfection is possible." Jack felt his consciousness starting to blur as he neared the column. In desperate defiance, he activated the emergency beacon on his suit, a signal to both his team and the fleet above. "You mistake unity for slavery," he gasped. "Real alliance comes from choice, not force." As if in answer to his words, explosions rocked the chamber. Anna and Mark had found another way in, blasting through walls with combined human and Vex explosives. Behind them poured soldiers of both species, weapons firing at the Ascendancy leaders. The force holding Jack faltered. He dropped to the floor as chaos erupted around him. Through the haze of battle, he saw Krav enter, carrying a device they had built together. A virus designed to separate the artificial neural connections the Ascendancy used to maintain their composite consciousness. "The terminal," Jack shouted, pointing to the main control panel. Krav moved with surprising speed for its bulky form, dodging energy blasts from the Ascendancy leaders. It reached the terminal and connected their device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the energy column began to flicker. The Ascendancy leaders screamed in voices that contained multitudes. The containment units around the room began to open, releasing their captives. "It's working," Mark said as he helped Jack to his feet. "The virus is breaking their network." The chamber shuddered as the Ascendancy's systems began to fail. The fortress itself seemed to be coming apart. "Everyone out," Jack ordered. "The whole place is collapsing." They retreated through the corridors, helping wounded and freed captives as they went. Behind them, the central chamber imploded as the energy column collapsed in on itself. They reached the surface just as the fortress began to sink into the ground, taking with it the remains of the Ascendancy's terrible technology. Above them, the space battle was ending. The Ascendancy ships, connected to the same network as their leaders, had shut down when the virus activated. Jack stood on a ridge watching the fortress disappear, feeling the weight of everything that had happened since they first landed on this planet. Beside him stood humans and Vex together, former enemies now bonded by a shared victory. "What happens now?" Anna asked, looking up at the ships in orbit. Jack turned to Krav, who was communicating with both Vex factions. "That depends on whether we can maintain this alliance." "Difficult," Krav admitted, "but necessary. Ascendancy may return. Other threats exist. Together, stronger than apart." As the dust settled over what had been the Ascendancy fortress, Jack thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. They had been sent to die in a war based on lies. Instead, they had found truth and forged peace. "Command wanted a strategic victory," Jack said quietly. "They got something much more important." "What's that?" Mark asked. Jack looked at the mixed group of survivors around him, human and Vex working together to tend wounds, share supplies, and plan for the future. "The beginning of something new," he answered. "Something worth fighting for."